Welcome. Please read these final warnings.
行きな。俺は動いてる的を撃つのが好きなんだ。痛くも痒くもないだろ。
Nah.
NANI? I love you.
So, this was a surprise. Undertale was definitely one of my favorite games of 2015, but I didn't really think it needed a second installment, and I certainly wasn't expecting one. And yet here we are. Deltarune. I've taken some time, a lot of time, and while I've played a couple of RPGs since Undertale that have truly set the bar higher for turn-based RPGs in my book, it's hard for me to forget about Undertale. There's a certain infectious, whimsical nature to this game, but does it carry on in this new chapter? All the stuff I raved about in my previous video, the slight subversion of typical turn-based RPG mechanics, impact of decision-making, the charming cast, the pacing and balance of tone, do those attributes still remain, and is anything new brought to the table? It's important to note that once Deltarune is installed, it's actually titled Survey Program. Considering the passionate fan reception that Undertale received, it's understandable that Toby Fox would want to test the waters and gauge the reception to this project before investing more resources to make the whole thing a reality. So, consider this my survey submission, as I critique this whole game front to back. In short, the soul of Undertale is definitely still here, and there's a clear focus on widening the scope and taking the original concept in a new direction. But whenever you take a single piece of silly putty and try to stretch it out to cover a larger area, it's bound to be a bit too thin in some parts. Is it completely fair to judge an incomplete game next to a complete one? No. But you know I'm gonna do it anyway. However, there's just no way to really discuss Deltarune at length without thoroughly spoiling both games. So, if you care about that, head over to Deltarune.com, play the game yourself, and then watch this video. Seriously, you can beat it in like 2 hours, easy. Is the coast clear? Cool. Then
you accept everything that will happen from now on.
So, assuming you aren't the type of person that gets off to systematically eliminating quirky but lovable skeletons, fish, reptiles, and goat people, Undertale ends with a cast looking out over the horizon, most of them seeing the sun for the first time. The main character is offered the opportunity to become the ambassador between humans and monsters to broker a new, lasting peace before everyone goes their separate ways. In an alternate universe from Undertale, Deltarune follows Chris, a quiet emo kid with a frightful taste in sweaters, who rides to school with her adoptive mother Toriel. Along the way, we see tons of familiar faces from the previous game, and learn that Chris has an older brother, Azriel, who has gone off to college. I instantly wanted to run around chatting up all these familiar faces in town, but we don't get that opportunity yet. Just a glimpse. Once Chris is in class, we meet Susie, the school edgelord. Now, Undertale obviously had a really good soundtrack, and it certainly played a key role in shaping the game's tonal variety. In Deltarune, not only is the soundtrack a bit better in my opinion, but it's also used slightly more effectively as well. Right before Susie is introduced, arguably the happiest, most upbeat track in the game is playing. And then, when that door bursts open, silence. Palpable contrast. This silence persists and creates an uneasy feeling as Susie is sent to go fetch chalk so that class can continue, and Chris is sent after her so that the plot can continue. A nervous interaction with Susie ensues. An equally tense track flares up, and then cuts out right before the final blow. After getting roughed up a bit, Chris is briefly informed that their choices don't matter, and the two end up making it to the school's spook room. The ground gives way, and just like that, we're back in the underground. They run into a mysterious shadowy figure who weaponizes so many spades all at once, you'd think this video was released back in 2014. This type of sequence was always a nice change of pace in the original Undertale, and Deltarune improves upon these scenes quite a bit by blending some of the bullet hell with the overworld, instead of stopping you in your tracks to complete a bullet hell minigame whenever you get hit. Nice improvement. This chase lands them in the mysteriously empty Kingdom of Darkness, led by the kind Prince Anagram, Azriel, a character that is so saccharine and unassailably nice that I instantly expect him to somehow be a villain in the end. But he also weirdly reminds me of my favorite Pokemon, so he's a cool guy in my book. Ralsei tells Chris and Susie that they're the prophesied heroes of legend that will bring balance to the light and darkness, save the world from calamity, and banish angels' heaven? I don't know, that didn't sound that bad. At this point, we're officially introduced to Lancer, a cheeky little fucker with a puzzling facial deformity, but he's a total card, so he makes it work. Lancer reminds me a lot of Baby Bowser, just even more incompetent somehow. And if there's any pattern to expect from Toby Fox's writing at this point, all incompetent villains are just lovable buffoons in need of a friend. He's quickly repelled, Susie sets out on her own, and Ralsei joins your party to realize the legend and teach you the basics of the game. Deltarune is still a turn-based RPG with timed hits for attacks, acts of kindness to appease enemies so that they can be spared, and bullet hell style dodging during the enemy's attack phase. But now you have party members to fight alongside you, and together you accrue a pool of tension points to spend on a few useful abilities. Unspent TP turns into extra cash, and you can generate additional TP by having projectiles graze you, which incentivizes a riskier playstyle. There seems to be fewer options for acts of kindness toward your enemies, which is an overall detriment, because having party members allows you to use an act of kindness and spare an enemy on the same turn, ending some fights instantly. This made the game feel a bit too easy, as I didn't have to use any items in my playthrough and I only had Ralsei go down like once. Furthermore, in Undertale, an important component of the gameplay was to find the act of kindness that best suited the personality of the monsters you faced, and without that, the monsters so far aren't really that memorable. And sure, the mechanic really wasn't that rock solid in Undertale to begin with, and trying to figure out what random, bizarre act would appease an enemy often felt like a shot in the dark. But sometimes it can feel that way trying to figure people out in real life too, and I'd like to think that was part of the charm. Undertale's big hook was that, contrary to other turn-based RPGs, the ideal way of winning was to spare your enemies instead of fighting them, and if you did fight your enemies, you'd feel the ramifications later on down the line. In Deltarune, the decision to spare your enemies or fight them doesn't change any of the main plot. In fact, as we were previously warned about, most of your choices don't seem to matter quite as much outside of changing how a few conversations play out. You can be a straight-up dick to Ralsei all game, but in the end, Ralsei has a heart of gold and will just forgive you every single time. The game still heavily encourages you to spare everything, and there's even an interesting dynamic with Susie when she joins your party, where she'll insist on fighting everything despite Ralsei's tendencies towards pacifism. It seemed like a cool dynamic was being set up here, where you'd have to race against the clock to save your enemies before Susie hurts them. But then the game almost immediately gives you the tools to just make Susie a non-threat. On top of that, if you choose to just fight everything anyway, then this cool detail just gets completely glossed over, as everyone suddenly forgets that we care for the well-being of this little bottle cap looking dude. As the story progresses, our cast bumbles eastward towards Card Castle, where Chris can confront the big bad, seal the dark fountain, and finally return home, but not before eating from a tree trunk honeypot full of salsa, top 10 anime betrayals, transformation sequences, making a checker dog wiggle his crown off so that he loses all of his power, the birth of a god, navigating through a forest maze by trusting that the villains are just that incompetent, the fall of a god, deciding the fate of refugees, and shaping the underworld socioeconomic climate for years to come by deciding what bake sale to buy from. I would watch the fuck out of that anime. These scenes were all fun, quirky, and random, just like your interactions with Sans and Papyrus in their game, but I'd be lying if I said this section of Deltarune didn't drag a little bit. In Undertale, all the harmless interactions with Papyrus and Sans were contrasted with the looming presence of Undyne, and before we even meet Undyne, Flowey is introduced as this deceptive, powerful, and malevolent force right from the start. Hell, we even find out that Asgore could be a threat to us. It could be argued that Susie kinda fills Undyne's shoes, but instead of being a threat underlying all the fun times, more focus is placed on developing Susie as a character, as she reluctantly coaches Lancer on how to be scarier, and Susie slowly but surely learns how to be a friend. When they finally reach Card Castle, Lancer suddenly remembers, hey, I'm letting a sadistic, murderous dinosaur come into my castle who could very possibly kill my dad, and he's understandably a little conflicted about that, so he throws them in jail. This sets up one of my favorite moments in this new chapter, where we get a chance to follow Susie for a short while. Having broken out of her confinement by quite literally dumpstering the guard, she's encountered with an easy puzzle that the gang have seen tons of by this point in the game. But Susie spent all of her time being edgy and talking about impaling herself. She really wasn't paying attention to any of the puzzles along the way. So, for the first time, she asks her friends for help. They coach her through it, and shortly after, when she encounters another puzzle, she's able to solve it herself. Then Susie has her standoff with Lancer, and, mirroring the battle with Toriel in Undertale, Lancer refuses to harm Susie. In this pivotal moment, Susie spares someone for the first time. In my opinion, this is where Deltarune starts to hit its stride again. With Susie officially joining the party, the atmosphere feels much more balanced and complete. A particular fight comes to mind where all three characters put their personalities on display, as they all attempt to flirt with the enemies. Susie's attempt is terse and ends awkwardly. Ralsei's attempt is verbose and filled with flattery, but it still ends awkwardly, but just for the opposite reason. Well, Chris, in the end, somehow plays their cards well and is the only one to win a heart. After the four friends finally defeat the big bad, Ralsei pulls back yet another hood to reveal that he's Ezreal. I'm overwhelmed by this unanticipated twist, but he's never seemed to recognize Chris, so perhaps it's too soon to tell if he's Chris's brother or not. A mystery that remains unsolved for now. Ralsei, Chris, and Susie part ways with newfound respect for one another, and resolve to begin their adventure anew tomorrow. At this point, I thought the chapter would be coming to a close, but not quite. Chris returns to the overworld and gets an opportunity to interact with almost all the townsfolk. Some new faces, but most of them old and familiar. Deltarune and Undertale hide a lot of their best lines and lore in the optional dialogue, so it's worthwhile talking to everyone and examining everything to flesh out the world or just read some funny flavor text. And while the detail in the environments can vary and is mostly found lacking, this is compensated a bit by how emotive some of these portrait animations can be.
Look at this dude. Wait till you see the. No.
My interest in this chapter reignited in a big way once I had the opportunity to explore town. In a way, it felt like coming home, but the prevailing feeling was bittersweet deja vu. Imagine coming home and everything is just a bit different from what you're used to. Familiar faces and personalities that harken 3 years back to an old adventure, but they all don't remember you. Almost all of them don't anyway. It's little moments like that in games that stick with you long after you put the controller down. After all is said and done, Chris returns home to a setting that mirrors the warmth and comfort of Toriel's home in the first moments of Undertale, and earns a well-deserved rest after this first leg of the journey. Oh shit! And I thought Undertale tugged at the heartstrings. In the end, despite my criticism, I think Deltarune is a very promising start to a new entry in Undertale's universe. While Undertale was a subversion of your typical turn-based RPG in a myriad of ways, the first chapter of Deltarune seems to be laying the groundwork for a more traditional turn-based RPG that preserves the soul and charm of its predecessor through its focus on good characters, music, and storytelling. As this is only the first chapter, there's still time for some of the game's lacking aspects, like the difficulty, to ramp up naturally. And, on that note, it's worth mentioning that there was one boss fight that definitely still gave me a lot of trouble.
Hey, that's pretty good.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to believe.
That's a lot of damage!
But this fight was only optional, and Chapter 1 of Deltarune doesn't reveal the actual main thread of its narrative until the very end. And let me just say, this scene definitely has me hyped for the second chapter, there's no doubt. But introducing a more prominent threat earlier on to contrast the first chapter's lighthearted moments would have made those lighthearted moments stand out even more, and vice versa. Many of the mechanics that made Undertale so memorable and different from other RPGs do feel a little out of place in this new chapter. Even Toby admits that the act fight system might be a bit vestigial because he, so far, does not intend to create multiple endings for the game based on the player's choices. However, there's one line from Ralsei early on that contrasts the line from Susie, where he emphasizes the importance of your choices, and that if we decide to fight everything, we might not find the results favorable. So maybe this will change as the game develops. While the enemies thus far aren't quite as memorable, the central cast and their banter consistently put a smile on my face. Ralsei makes an excellent foil to Susie. This is the face of a man that's sick of your shit, and Susie herself gets a really nice character arc. At the start, her natural inclination is to be intimidating, to be aggressive, to fight. But then, she gets swept up into this whimsical adventure, and learns to approach situations by acting kindly instead. And really, that's the same character arc that players have when they first play Undertale. For me, Deltarune was a completely unexpected, enjoyable surprise, and Toby Fox continues to impress me with his ability to create these games almost completely on his own. It's not Undertale, but it also shouldn't be Undertale. Deltarune will go its own way and tell its own story, and I'm excited to see how the rest unfolds. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. This game gave me a lot to think about, and honestly a part of me has been wanting to make videos like this again for a while now. Share this video around if you enjoyed it, and here are my past reviews if you haven't seen those yet. Thanks again guys, take it easy.